am so excited to be here today. And I'm so excited that it's you here today because I'm about to dive into a topic that is a little new for me. This will be the first time I'm sharing this type of conversation, or I hope it's a conversation eventually, with an audience. But before I get to what I'm about to talk about, I want to understand what brought us here. And so if you'll indulge me for a moment, I'd like to ask you to close your eyes for a moment, okay? And think back to the food or the meal that first triggered your interest in food. Maybe it was so delicious it completely surprised you with how good it was. Imagine you're eating it right now. Experience the tastes, the aroma, maybe the texture in your mouth, where you were when you first had this food, and how it made you feel. Savor it. You can open your eyes now, but I hope you'll hang on to this moment because as we go through this, I'll be touching back on this experience. And for me personally, when I go through this exercise, I think back to when I was 11 years old. And I grew up in northern Utah in an agricultural community. And one summer, my grandmother, who was a school teacher, she says, you know what, you're gonna go on a trip with me. We're gonna go to Eastern Europe for 3 weeks, and it was my first time out of the country, my first real time away from my family, and my parents rather, and the 800-person town I'd grown up in. Okay, and this was back when Eastern Europe was still communist. It was completely foreign to me, completely unusual. And the first night we were at a hotel, our tour group came together, and I looked at the buffet that they had spread out for us, and nothing looked even remotely familiar to me until I got to the end of the table, and there was a bowl full of blackberry jam. Well, I took a big dollop of this jam, popped it onto a cracker, popped it in my mouth, and lo and behold, it was caviar. Okay, it was the worst taste experience I've ever had because it was just so different from what I expected. And for the next week, I was so tentative around the food there, thinking I was going to have one of these taste experiences again, that all I ate was the bread and cheese, which at least I could, recognize. Kind of clung to my grandmother a little bit. It was just a really homesick kind of feeling. Well, all of this changed one morning. We pulled into a little Czech pub out in the countryside, and the first course that was served to us was this creamy wild mushroom soup with cracked pepper. And I thought, I'm a big fan of tuna mac, with the condensed cream of mushroom soup that we had, way back when. And so that at least was familiar to me. I took a bite, and wow, my mind was absolutely blown just with that first bite. It was like taking a bite of the forest. It was rich and earthy, spicy, absolutely delicious, and absolutely unlike anything I had ever eaten before. And that memory lives on in my mind so distinctly that I'm actually up here salivating right now, thinking about that first meal. And it's a meal that changed everything, okay? For the rest of the trip, you could not put a dish in front of me without me trying it. I was so afraid I was gonna miss out on another wonderful taste experience that I would at least try everything. And it set me on a path of exploration for the rest of my life, not just for the rest of the trip, into exploring new flavors and introducing other people to new flavors. It took me 30 years, though, and a completely unrelated experience to understand the power of that moment. And this experience happened last spring when I got up to go for a run for the first time in about 6 months, no exercise prior to that. And about a mile in, I was so winded. My ankles were in pain. I was on the verge of turning around and going home. But I didn't. I turned the corner instead out of the shade I'd been running into and came around into the golden hour sunlight that was on the hill ahead of me. And an amazing thing happened. All of a sudden, the breeze picked up, and it blew a swirl of blossom petals and perfume around me. And I was literally stopped in my tracks at the beauty of it. It's like time stopped. The petals were suspended in air. I'm sure you can think of movies where they stop all of a sudden and everything's swirling about you. That's how I felt. My skin tingled. I had no words. It's like thought left. I was just caught up in the moment, completely present. And just as quickly as that moment had come, the petals settled on the ground like snowfall, and the moment was gone. And I kept on running, and I ran 3 more miles, happy, joyful even, to be outside moving my body in this beautiful natural setting. But like that bowl of soup, it started me down another path of exploration. And by the time I got home, I had made a mental catalog of dozens of these types of experiences and I was hooked really on figuring out what these ephemeral, fleeting moments really were, how they came to be, and why they can inspire us to continue to do something right when we're at our biggest point of not following through, okay, whether it's eating or enjoying a run. Well, what I came to discover in this past year, as I've thought about this more, is that these moments are moments of wonder. And wonder is defined as a feeling of surprise and admiration in the face of something beautiful, unexpected, unfamiliar, or even inexplicable that drives us to want to learn more. The French philosopher René Descartes said that, in his view, wonder had a purpose. He described wonder as one of our primary passions, along with love and anger and hate. Wonder, though, was primary because it intermingled with all of these other passions or emotions we had and made them stronger. And he believed that the purpose of it was to cause us to remember, to learn, to solidify an experience in our memory so we couldn't help but explore it further. Okay. And in this light, wonder truly is an expansive concept. It's ephemeral. It happens in a moment, but it can trigger a variety of things and encourage us to try new things, to explore, to get out in the world. And for the rest of the time that I'm up here, I'd like to explore how wonder doesn't just change the way we see the world, but it can change the way we view food. And I would also like to share some ideas for how we can begin to cultivate wonder in our lives. So, when you think back to when you first experienced the food moment I asked you about a moment ago, it might not be surprising that right after you had that food, a flurry of questions entered into your mind. Oh my gosh, what was this? How have I not had this before? Where did this come from? Who made this? Where can I get more? Okay, it drives us, it inspires us to want to learn and to explore and hopefully capture that experience again. You know, that bowl of soup, what I wouldn't give to find a recipe for it because I've never found anything to compare. It is elusive, but it drives me. That curiosity drives me. And it can drive us to want to recapture that thing so badly, that taste, that texture, that feeling even that first captivated us. And I believe that author Muriel Bradbury, have any of you read Gourmet Rhapsody? Okay, so Muriel Bradbury wrote a book about a food critic. He's at the end of his days, and as we learn throughout the book, he has had a glorious career as a food critic, both good and bad. Some people love him, some people hate him. But on his deathbed, he recalls a lost flavor from his childhood that basically haunts him. And in reflection, though he probably didn't know it at the very beginning, that flavor is what drove him to pursue a career as a food critic, to begin to search for new and more exquisite taste experiences that he loved, he enjoyed, but none of them ever quite lived up to that first and ultimate truth of his entire life. When we eat something that so affects us like this, it can lead us to curiosity about food, unlike any other type of inspiration. Okay, we might seek out new flavors and textures, learn to cook or dive into all sorts of restaurants and food carts, whatever it may be. We might develop a sensitivity to things. So, for example, my brother grew up loving honey. We lived in the countryside. We just had typical clover honey. But today, he can tell you the exact country and type of flour that the honey should come from to taste best with cornbread, for example. He can tell you that honey from the wild forests of Ghana is going to be dark, thick, and smoky compared to a German creamy sunflower honey that's almost like toffee. Okay, it has led him to this type of discernment with his food. And curiosity can maybe even lead us to be in a room full of people like this today, right? A shared interest, that moment that brought us all here to begin with. And I find this a lot. I happen to lead ethnic food market tours in my community, and I'm from Salt Lake. And what I find, when I first started these, I thought I was introducing people to new flavors, to some of the great resources that we have in Salt Lake. And what I came to realize is that most of the people that come to the tours, they've had moments like this. They've had something that inspired them to want to learn more about food, but they didn't have a guide. They didn't know how to go to these stores and feel comfortable in them when everything seems so foreign. So by the end of the day, we've shared a meal, we've had beautiful taste experiences, we've met the owners of these shops, we've oriented ourselves to the stores, and everyone walks away confidently. And weeks later, I will often get messages from people saying, hey, I booked a culinary tour to Mexico. I'm going there next month with my husband. Or guess what I made with those spices I bought at the Indian grocery store. And so curiosity begets curiosity, and it opens people up to new experiences and makes them really, really interested in expanding, okay? So it's a really neat thing. Which leads me to my second point, which is wondrous encounters with food rarely just involve the food itself, right? If you think back to your moment, it probably involved other people, maybe a particular setting, sitting on the beach and eating fresh lobster, okay, being in a marketplace and trying a fruit you'd never had before. Maybe you were in your mother's or grandmother's kitchen trying a food that was a family recipe handed down over the ages. There was feeling, there were people, there were places. Sometimes there's even an understanding of the food tradition or story and understanding of where that food comes from. And in fact, if my husband William were here, he would tell you that his sense of wonder, a recent one that was very significant from him, didn't come from tasting a food so much as learning where a food he eats all the time comes from. A few years ago, he turned 40 and he decided he wanted to go to Belize for his birthday. So we went down there with some friends, and we stopped at a little coastal fishing village, very humble, little wooden shacks on stilts, you know, but it was a place to eat. We stopped there, and since we were the only people in the restaurant owner said, you know, come take a tour with me, come visit my village. So we walked around the little village, and every single house had a garden and trees growing in the yard. And these trees were cashew trees. None of us had ever seen cashew fruit. Okay, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they look kind of like an apple. They are extremely delicate, and the cashew actually grows like a growth at the end of the fruit. People in Belize actually eat the fruit or make it into liqueur or soda. It's very delicate and fragile. They can't ship it, so they eat it locally. They don't necessarily like the cashews or eat them, and so they export them, but not before they clean them. And cashews, actually, they're naturally toxic. You have to clean them, you have to peel the shell, they have a corrosive coating that can burn the skin, and you cannot eat them off the tree. And so to prepare them for consumption, you actually have to clean them very carefully and make sure that they're roasted and cleaned before you can ship them. The process of doing that and also preventing the people who do the work to prepare them, to prevent them from being harmed by that corrosion, is a really tedious, time-consuming process that very few of us ever learn about or see when we buy a can of cashews at the grocery store. Okay. For William, being able to see how this food that he often took for granted, how it's prepared, the work that goes into making this food available to him, was unusual, okay. It just put a place and a face to a food that he had just taken for granted. And that has carried over into how he's viewed other foods that he eats ever since. Okay. Now, This experience was in a different country, but I learned pretty early on in my career that we can have experiences like this of connection, of wonder, in our own backyard. One of the first jobs that I had after college was working at a community garden program. I managed the youth program, and the kids that I worked with, most of them were from the inner city. They lived in apartment buildings. They thought that vegetables and fruit came from cans and freezer bags, and they pretty much hated veggies. And so, after the end of the summer, they had seen week by week how the garden changed. And when it finally came time for these tomatoes to be ripe, they were amazed. It completely changed the way they thought about food, that they could suddenly eat these candy sweet tomatoes, and they were a brilliant, wonderful taste in their mouth. Okay. There's a lot of connection between these three topics: curiosity, connection, and consumption. And one point I'd like to make is that we really cannot cultivate wonder. It involves an element of surprise. But what we can do is begin to invite wonder into our lives by cultivating practices. Okay, we heard about some of those a little earlier today. Slowing down, becoming more receptive. Oh, there we go. More receptive to the world around us, being mindful of what we eat, paying attention to the details. And all wonder appears to have this quality of openness. Okay, it's very influential. Lucky for us food lovers, it turns out there are also conditions that make us highly receptive to wonder. And these are things like traveling, going to a new restaurant, going for a hike outside where you might run into wild berries or wild onions, things where you're right in the heart of nature and wonder itself. A third way we can do this is to engage in something I call wild perception. And when we're kids, we sort of absorb information willy-nilly. It's how we learn, it's how we grow. And as we grow older and wiser, we begin to add filters to how we accept information. And it helps us focus in, narrow in on things that interest us. And wild perception is basically removing these filters and seeing the world that we thought we knew through new eyes. Okay. Smelling the perfume of basmati rice compared to jasmine, hearing the pop of a garbanzo bean right when it's ripe and you try to shell it. Okay, these are the things to notice how food is, and it takes practice. It requires some intentionality around how we eat and how we choose to perceive the food that we're eating, but it can make us more receptive to wonder as well as help our meal be more pleasurable. And the last way is sense making. I read an article recently where Malcolm Gladwell talked about how people have lots and lots and lots of experiences, but they don't have time to make sense of them. And sense making is really just the process of understanding what we've been through so that we can either recreate it, understand it better, learn from it, pursue our curiosity. Okay, so sense making becomes a part of our story. It helps retain that moment in our memory, and we don't lose it. It doesn't just float away. So these are all things we can do to cultivate our ability to receive or invite wonder into our lives. And because we're running out of time, I just want to end by saying wonder can be a catalyst for curiosity. It can help connect us to our food and our food source. And it can actually drive consumer behavior, because when we experience wonder, it opens us up to new experiences and helps expand what we think is possible in the world. Thank you.